I'm Sarah, this is Hardcover Hearts, and this video is my favorites of 2021, last year. I read a tremendous amount, and this is the second part. The first part has my literary fiction and my translated fiction. All of those books are in that video, so I will put a link to it below so that you can check that out. This also sits in a special playlist that has my previous 2 years of favorites, in case you are so interested in looking through those. So let's jump right in because there's still a ton of books to talk about. All right, so let's talk about nonfiction. So specifically memoirs, biographies, and essays. So the first one on this list was a complete surprise to me. I thought this was going to be much more difficult, much more inaccessible, but instead it was just a delight to read. And this is Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter by Simone de Beauvoir. Look at that gorgeous, gorgeous cover. This is translated by James Kirkup. This is really Simone de Beauvoir's early years, her school years, she has a very difficult relationship with her mother, and she has a best friend who is kind of her solace, and it's about them growing up together. I loved this book, and I thought it was quite interesting, and kind of made me appreciate her even more, so much so that this year I'm going to be reading all of her fiction with Leo, my friend, of A Little Book Life. So, there's nothing better than a book that gives you a good start and makes you want more, which this one did. Then I read a book that was so much more than I thought it was going to be. I did the audio of this. This is From Scratch, a memoir of love, Sicily, and finding home by Tembi Locke. Tembi Locke is the sister of Attica Locke, and I have loved Attica Locke's mystery series. And so I thought, oh, how interesting that she has a sister who's also a writer. This is the story of her love affair, of her husband and her love affair, and different cultures, and coming together, and finding home, and what does home look like, and how it changes. I don't want to say too much about this, except that she meets her love in Florence when she's there as an exchange student. And they have a wonderful romance, and I have a big thing about Florence. I love Florence very much, and so that was really my lure in. And I had no idea that I was going to get something so emotional and thoughtful and beautifully encapsulated a love affair. I completely fell in love with these people. I fell in love with their love story. I fell in love with their struggles, with how they approached their lives, and I just think it was a wonderful, wonderful read. And I've talked about this one before. This is a very niche, very me book. And I think it's because it speaks so specifically to things that I care about. So this may resonate with you, it may not, but I'm putting it on my list because it's my list. This is Rachel Kushner's The Hard Crowd, Essays from 2000 to 2020. I love the cover, number one. Number two, Rachel Kushner is a San Franciscan, and there's just so many intersections with my life that happen with her and what she talks about. She talks about riding motorcycles. I've ridden motorcycle. That was my first vehicle I ever owned, was a motorcycle here in San Francisco. She writes a beautiful story about someone that I know. She used to live with people I know that are featured in some of these stories. Some of the things I care about, she writes about. Things I'm interested in, she writes about. Not every essay is slam dunk, as always happens, I think, in an essay collection, but more than enough were interesting to me. I like how she talks about art. I like how she talks about San Francisco. I yeah, so for me, this was a really, really great read, and I had to run out and buy it. So yeah. For my next read, this really hit a lot of great spots for me. I love a memoir about purposeful lives, about artists, about creatives, about outsiders, found family, and community, and purposeful living. All of that is here. This is Akwakwe Emezie's Dear Sen Thurin, a Black Spirit Memoir. Yeah, this book was just so phenomenal. I am very quickly becoming an Akwakwe Emezie fangirl. They write interesting stories, beautifully rendered. I think I've only not read Freshwater, which is their very first, and Pet. So I have both of those and will be reading them this year without a doubt. I love how they write. This is very raw, tender, thoughtful, defiant, but also hurt and needing a comfort and a way to protect themselves against the world when the world gets a little too rough. But again, also purposeful. This really is their story of becoming a writer and someone who is determined to live their life on their terms. And I have nothing but respect for that. So, woo, it was good. Someone else who lives life on their own terms, these are two memoirs that I adored deeply. This is Deborah Levy's, both The Cost of Living and Real Estate. I just also love these covers. Deborah Levy writes as an older writer. This one, she's hitting her 60th birthday. This one is after the breakup of her marriage, and thinking of and having to relive and rethink what does her life look like now. I think that she's a phenomenal writer. I love her voice and her tone. I want to hang out with her. She seems to be someone who is interesting, who cares about community, and who cares deeply about the act of writing. These are just phenomenal. This is the second and third, and I really hope she does more of these. I think originally it was only meant to be 3, but I don't want her to stop. I love these. I love these. Another book that I've heard tons about and hadn't really spent time with until this year was Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmermer. Put that out there. This book is phenomenal. It was so much more than I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to be getting, nature writing, but it's political, it's cultural, it's linguistic, it's historic, it's poignant and thoughtful and modern and feminine and powerful. There's so much here in these essays. It's a bunch of different essays that are all combined that really talk about Indigenous wisdom. And I cannot, I know I'm late to the party, but if you have not picked it up, it is really a great, great book. It's also great in audio if that would be a preferred method for you. The next one could be in my translated works or here. I think it fits here more because it's a memoir. And this is Annie Ernaux's A Girl's Story. This is translated by Allison L. Strayer. Annie Ernaux is writing about the first time she was ever really out of her parents' sight. She was raised in a very controlling family situation, a very strict upbringing, and she was allowed to go away for a summer camp where she was working as kind of like a junior camp counselor. And it's the first time that she comes into contact with boys and men and sexuality, and is completely out of her depth, And the compassion that she looks back on herself and her life and who she was there is so touching and poignant and beautiful. It's a hard story to read, but it's so interesting, and her writing is just impeccable. This is an essay collection that really small but packed a punch for me. This is I'm Afraid of Men by Vivek Shraya. Again, tiny sliver of a book. This is about Vivek's experience as a trans person living in the world, all of the ways that they have to second guess themselves, they have to protect themselves, the things that they need to do, all the ways that they're not just emotionally hurt, but physically in danger out in the world, and what that does to them and their sense of safety and their ability to live in the world. It was powerful. I didn't see it as a sob story, but I definitely made me think more deeply about the trans experience than I have before. Powerful. I think more people should read this. Okay, now let's switch it up because those were some intense books. The next set that I want to talk about, these are backlisted books and classics. So I think I've made mention before that I always love going into used bookstores, and I think reading backlisted books has really expanded my horizon. It's not just about reading what's new and coming out, but what are the old classics? What are the old books and the old authors that I don't know about, but maybe I've heard mention, and I want to be well-rounded as a reader. So these are really important to me to go back and read some of these, to actually actively seek them out. So the first one is a book that I read with the most wonderful women. Roz from Scaladandaling about the books. We have Hannah from Hannah's Books, and Kim from Middle of the Book March. And the four of us read this together, and it was an absolute joy. This was Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell. Look at this gorgeous cloth-bound edition. Just really, really lovely. And I can't imagine a better group of women to read this with. This is the story of this little town, Cranford, that is fundamentally filled with women and older women. And it is just kindness and sweetness, but not saccharine, but it is very tender and thoughtful about women's lives and lives of women of a certain age. The rituals that they all follow, the ways that they support each other, the ways that they take care of each other and create this sense of community. So this was charming, it was delightful, poignant and tender, and I could not have picked a better group of women to read it with. So thank you all very much for doing this with me, inviting me to join you all. Another one, so I'd heard about this from one of my favorite podcasts, Backlisted. This is The Weather in the Streets by Rosamund Lehman. Gorgeous, gorgeous cover. This is a Virago Modern Classic cover. They did this for their 40th year anniversary. This was the story of an affair, the story of a love affair that was surprising. It was visceral, it was emotional, and for when it was written, it was mildly scandalous. I loved the perspective of female sexuality and desire, and from kind of what is a kind of a stuffy time period, but this one didn't have that. It was rich and the lifeblood was pumping through it. I I absolutely adored it and want to read more Rosalind Lehman books in the future. Then I've been doing a project with Elizabeth of Bookish North, and we've been reading Virginia Woolf's oeuvres, her fiction books, all of her fiction books. And although I have not gotten on with many of those, this was remarkable. This is Mrs. Dalloway. So much of this book I was intimidated by before reading it, and it completely enchanted me. I think about some scenes. There was a scene that shocked me so much. I literally dropped the book and gasped out loud because it was so fast and so intense. The way she writes multi-layered experiences, the way her party scenes, and the internal monologue, and then observing, and at the same time interacting, and that way that people think in multiple levels simultaneously, the fact that she could capture it, the way she talks about London. There is so much beauty in here. I am not a Virginia Woolf stan girl, but this one is phenomenal. And then I wanted to read something from one of her homegirls. This is from Veda Sackville West, All Passions Spent. And I can't believe that I didn't know about this before. This is phenomenal. I love an old woman story. And this story is about an older woman whose husband dies, and she is very, very wealthy, and she decides that she's going to live by herself. She's not going to let her obnoxious family put her in a home or close her up or anything like that. She has a home that she's had in mind for all of number of decades, and she wants to live in that home. And she decides she's going to do it on her own, finally live the life that she wants to live. I thought it was charming. It was sweet and made me laugh. I absolutely loved it, and love a great old woman character. Then I would be remiss if I didn't have some Anita Brookners on this list. Anita Brookner is someone I'm doing a project with Leo of A Little Book Life. And there are three here that have really stood out for me this year. So we're reading all of Anita Brookner's works, and it's taking us about 2 years. These are three of the last grouping that have really stood out. This one, Brief Lives, it may be one of my favorites. We have the most tantalizing frenemy story ever in Faye and Julia. Julia is a horrible, horrible, self-centered, narcissistic person, and Faye is a woman desperate to just get out of this friendship that she finds herself stuck in with this woman. And it's funny, it's poignant, it's frustrating, and also very sad. Anita does veer to the bleak. And this is no exception, but I loved it. This one is called A Family Romance. In the United States, it's also called Dolly. And this really is about two women, Dolly and Jane. Dolly is her aunt by marriage, and she doesn't, our narrator, Jane, doesn't really have a lot in common with her, but is routinely forced to focus on her and to help her and to think about her, and with interesting consequences for the both of them. Anita Brookner she does interesting characters and a lot of tension and frustrating relationships, and this was no exception. And then the last of the Anita Brookners that I read that I really loved, this is Incidents in the Rue Logia by, obviously, Anita Brookner. And this, she takes us to France. And so we actually have, I would say almost half of this book is set in France. It's a romance gone a little sideways. And we have both a male and a female character in this book, and it was great. I wish she would venture out of dreary London a little more often, because this was a really great read. Then lastly, let's go into the mysteries. You've heard me mention this if you've been watching. I'm addicted to this series. This is the Sam Wyndham series by Abir Mukherjee. The first one is A Rising Man. This is a take on colonialism, where we have Sam Wyndham, who is in Scotland Yard. He has found himself in Calcutta. He is living there and is a captain in the police department there. He's given a sergeant that he works closely with, and is an opium addict. So we have a man who has a lot of challenges in his personal life, and who really doesn't subscribe to a lot of the nonsense of British colonialism that is being bandied about, and builds a really strong foundation and relationship with his sergeant. And I love this series. I think it's really smart, very action-packed, more action-packed than I usually read. But if you like a good historical mystery, you cannot go wrong with this series. This was a surprise. This is a mystery that doesn't really kick off until near the end. This is Josephine Tay, Ms. Pym Disposes. This is such an interesting story. Miss Pym is a woman. She is a writer. She's a very famous writer, and she's asked by her friend to come and kind of give a seminar to the women at this college. So she goes there, and she's really entranced and enchanted by these young women and the environment, and she keeps threatening that she's going to leave, and oh, I've got to get back, but keeps staying and becomes interested in these women's lives, and then something happens. It's a slow burn. It's thoughtful. In the spirit of Dorothy L. Sayers, this was a surprise. I kept wondering when the murder was going to happen, or when the mystery was when the key event was going to occur. And bold of her to put it way in the book. But this was such a surprise. Backlisted did a podcast about this one as well. So worth your time if you're a mystery lover. Another one I read, this one near the end of the year. This one I loved this. This was so much fun. The Appeal, One Murder, 15 Suspects, Can You Uncover the Truth by Janice Howlett. I think this might be her debut, which is just wild. So this has a ton of characters, as I said, 15 suspects. It's set in a small town, in a small little village. And we've got a hospital and people who work at the hospital. And then we have a theater troupe, an amateur theater troupe at this community center. And a young girl is one of the family members of the troupe. Their young daughter falls ill, and there becomes an appeal for donations, which sets off all sorts of things in this community. This is written in epistolary texts and emails, and we start knowing that there's been a murder, and there's already been someone convicted. And these two junior researchers for this law firm are being put on to read through all of these transcripts and see if they can figure out who it was and who was convicted and who actually did it, so they can help in the appeal. Fun. I literally absorbed this in like a day and a half. I stayed up way too late to read it and woke up early the next morning to finish it. So I was completely enthralled with this. I'm going to end with the book that surprised me the most. I put off reading this for so many years because of my deep love for Dorothy L. Sayers' character Harriet Vane, one of my favorite characters of all literature ever. This was Thrones Dominations. Let me kind of show you this cover. And we have it, Dorothy L. Sayers and Jill Patton Walsh. So what happened was, this was a manuscript that had not been completed, and the family and the estate asked Jill Patton Walsh to gussy it up and have it ready for publication. But fundamentally, most of it's there, and you can absolutely tell the writing. You can absolutely tell that this is a Dorothy L. Sayers book with some spit polish from Jill Patton Walsh. This is a continuation of the love story between Sir Peter Wimsey and our Harriet Vane, and they've come back from their honeymoon and what happened in Busman's holiday, and they're settling in, and there's all sorts of fun things that are happening because Harriet Vane is going to continue to write. Even though she is now a lady, she is married to Sir Peter Wimsey, but she is still who she is, and she's not going to give that up for the title, and nor would he ever expect her to. And there are things, a mystery that happens in here, but you know, I'm here for Harriet Vane all day long. This delighted me. I enjoyed it so much, and I'm so happy that I finally got to it. So that's it, everyone. A ton of books. Thank you so much if you've watched all of this. I cannot thank you enough, and stay tuned for more of my weeks of reading coming up in the future. And I would love to know, have you read any of these? Are there ones that you're specifically going to put on your list? Thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.